Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday live Q&A, which is something that I actually do every other week on my private platform. And so we're actually going to do one here today. So I will be taking audience questions for probably around 2 hours today. And how you're going to get your question answered is by actually going to the link that should be pinned somewhere in the chat, or it should be posted somewhere in the chat on the platform you're watching me on. So there's going to be a link that Wolf will post, and that is actually going to bring you to my website. And that just allows us to streamline all the questions, because what we were finding from the lectures is that we were missing a lot of the questions in the Q&A period. And so this allows you to just ask your questions on a proper form. You do have to give your email address, and then you can actually also vote on the questions that you want to be seen. If you don't have a question, but you're looking at the form and you see a question that you really want answered, you can go ahead and just give that a little thumbs up on our private form there on the website. And then that will have a little bit of a higher weight when it's randomly selected. Okay, so that's how we're going to do things with the questions here today. All right, so the moment that the link was the moment that the link was posted in the chat, you guys had caught on, and so we already have questions pouring in. So let's just get to those. And we will also be including member questions, because you can also watch this live stream with the community at gigiyoung.com. There's a whole chat there. There's a whole community going on where this is also being streamed. So I will be answering those questions under the name just member. And then anyone who is submitting it that's not a member will just be your username. All right. All right. So this is a member question, and it is: any thoughts on how to develop psychic gifts when struggling with extreme OCD, paranoia, and anxiety? Okay, so the first thing that we have to remember about developing psychic gifts, so we're talking about clairvoyance, clairaudience, claircognizance, all these gifts that would be considered psychic powers, is that they're actually natural. So the ability to see the spiritual planes is actually a natural ability to you, okay? It's an ability we actually had in prior periods of earthly development that we lost and that we just regain. So the first thing to know about intuitive abilities is that they're natural, and it's a regaining of these faculties that are laying deep within our being already. But there's no shortcut to developing them either. You know, today in modern times, you see this transhumanism movement coming forward that is basically a materialist movement that wants to create psychic abilities and spiritual powers through machines. You know, you can have a chip in your brain and suddenly you can have this sense of clairvoyance, a false clairvoyance. You can, you know, heal any limb in your body. You can do all this kind of stuff that really we already have the spiritual power to do, but that takes personal sacrifice, and it takes the ability to really go deeply within yourself and heal. And then as you heal and as you find harmony and balance, all of these abilities come online. Now, in psychic development, we call this the unfoldment process. So this also means that when you're developing your when you're developing spiritually in regards to sort of what psychic powers come online, you can't really develop them a la carte, or you can't really develop them the way that you want to develop them through force. Like, I really want to be clairvoyant, or I really want to be clairaudient. It's a process of unfoldment that you have to adhere to, that's based on your past lives, that's based on the nature of your soul. So if you come online, you know, with your lunar clairs, what I personally call lunar clairs, which are clairsentience, claircognizance, and these inner quiet clairs, then that is your process. And that has to do with the nature of your soul. and honoring your soul development. Whereas you could also come online very strongly in your solar clairs, which are the very obvious ones, which are clairvoyance and clairaudience, and, you know, just very obvious spiritual abilities, which most famous psychics are primarily. Now, everybody has these to a degree, but there is an order in which they tend to come on, and you have to honor that order. And only when you accept the order in which they come on can the other ones light up, okay? So if you have, there's certain things that make spiritual development difficult, all right? So if you have things like physical pain as well, it can make meditation hard. It can make relaxing hard, right? You're mentioning OCD, paranoia, and anxiety. This can make psychic development hard because you're essentially not able to fully relax. And if you want to be able to spiritually develop, one of the first key things is being able to relax your mind, but also relax the body, because psychic ability is really permeability. Okay, psychic ability is really just increased overall permeability of your consciousness. It's just sensitivity. And if you're very anxious, if you're very, if you've got too much going on in your mind, you're going to have to make a concerted effort to have a very strong, regular, disciplined meditation practice. Okay, you have to create a very strong core of magnetism within your being that is your I am, that is your center, that is your power. Okay, you do this through meditation, a strong meditation practice where you observe your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. You observe your thoughts and you develop a very strong magnetic center within yourself. And that has to be done, okay? And you'll find that when you do this, when you have a strong meditation practice, I mean every day for at least 5 to 10 minutes, morning and night is better, right? But you have to have that. You have to have that point where you are creating harmony in your being. That's the only way that spirituality, that spiritual gifts are going to increase. Because what happens is when the mind is going too much up here, and I've mentioned this in many of my courses that I have, if your mind is going like this, okay, if it's running, if it's anxious, if it's too fast, if you're too in your head, which 99.9% of us are, including myself, then what's going to happen is that spiritual information is going to come in, but it's going to be like going through a wood chipper. Okay, so you're going to get a psychic insight just like any other mystic would, good or bad, talented or not. It's going to come into your field and it's going to be chipped up like it's in a wood chipper. You're not going to receive it properly. You're going to get fragments. And if it's really bad, if your mind is really not disciplined at all, then you're not going to get anything. You're not going to even get any snippet of a vision. It's just literally going to be torn up. Okay, so you have to begin with a very strong meditation practice. Okay, this one is from Soul Man. Hey, Soul Man. And you said, do you think Tesla was aware of the nature of electricity as Steiner described as dying light? Yes. So I just did a lecture called The Electric Apocalypse. And it's all about how the earth is becoming more and more electrified. It's becoming more and more surrounded with all of these discordant frequencies that actually compete with our natural, organic, biological frequencies. The actual energy of our being and of our planet. These are competing frequencies that are being artificially created through electricity, through bringing forward too much magnetism from the earth artificially, through radiation, through internet. All of this kind of stuff is actually creating a false synthetic sphere around the earth. Now, in occult science, this is called the eighth sphere, right? Or it's manifesting the lower astral plane upon the earth, or it's manifesting the contents of the subatomic planes upon the earth, which we really don't want. They're planes of death. We don't really want too much of that up here. And so immediately what comes to mind is people like Nikola Tesla and this whole electric revolution that was going on at the turn of the century, where we had discovered electricity, industrialization was increasing, and the world was changing, and it was really speeding up. And it's also the age of all of the railroad barons, and where you see people like Carnegie and all these very rich people around, Manhattan, and things start to really gain and hoard a lot of wealth. So there was a massive power shift actually around the time that electricity was becoming mainstream. And the whole thing about Tesla is that there were some people, even in theosophy and in spiritual circles, that believed that electricity was a pure organic source. Now it is, right? Lightning is natural. It is natural to the earth, but it comes from a certain level of the earth's development that's being brought forward. So it's kind of like a Frankenstein thing, where it's an energy that is in the sub realms that's being brought forward and utilized. So there are some things that we have to understand about it if we're gonna use it, right? It's not exactly fully organic in the sense of the sun is organic, the stars are organic light. That is light ether in the highest sense of the word, right? This is the pure light. Electricity is not light ether. It's not pure light. It's electricity. So there's a difference between light, right, which is actually an evolutionary thing for us, and electricity. Electricity is not pure light ether. It's electricity. It's actually light from a prior era of the earth that's brought forth. Okay. So now it wasn't really understood at the turn of the century what this electricity was. Now, some mystery schools did know, but I don't think Tesla fully knew, because if you look at Tesla's plans for what he had, he wanted to basically use electricity. Like he wanted to place electricity in the walls, I believe, of like schools. I'm not 100% certain on this, but he had a lot of plans with electricity that probably actually wouldn't have worked, because the problem with sitting and bathing in too much electricity is that it actually affects your mind. It actually affects your head. It can affect your thinking, because again, it's not pure light. Electricity is not sunlight. It's not pure light. It is a force that's drawn up from the subplanes of the earth. We can use it. That's fine. I'm using it now, but it's not the same thing as sunlight. Okay. That's the thing. It's not like we can't use it. It's like, it's that it's not an issue of good and evil. Is electricity good or evil? It's a matter of temperance. We have to understand the force that we're working with exactly, and how to use it properly. It's like any power, right? So I believe that some of the lectures that Steiner made on electricity were actually geared towards Edison and Tesla, and sort of this unbridled releasing of electrical forces from the inner earth, and what Steiner viewed as something that could be used for positive. It could be used for good. It could be used to be productive, but it also had this kind of shadow side, this dark side. And Steiner, in my opinion, was really hard on the issue because nobody else was. People really weren't necessarily, people were very excited about this new power, but there needed to be this other conversation that was had. So he came down on it to create a balance. All right, here is a member question. What is your advice for those starting their psychic development journey? Okay, so your psychic development journey is really your spiritual development journey. So there's no difference between developing your clairs, right, and just developing spiritually. the more, you know, moral that you become as a human being, the more ethical you become as a human being, the more compassionate, the more loving, the more powerful psychically you become. The development of psychic gifts is directly connected to how ethical you are, right? How moral you are in your daily life and in your conduct, and also how loving and compassionate you are. That is the biggest secret that no one talks about, is that, you know, you don't get these kinds of capacities come online unless in the spirit plane there's the understanding of morality. Now, when you see very immoral people with psychic abilities, they're not so much developing those abilities in this life. What happens there is that there are people who had these powers developed in past lives. They come online in this life, and then through selfishness, they actually destroy their psychic abilities. So it's kind of like a flame that burns too hot, it burns down. And so some people are psychic not because they've really developed it in this life through morality and through meditation and inner work, but because they are bringing it over from a past life. And then if you use those abilities immorally, then you basically burn that ability up. And so your next life, you will not have the abilities to the degree that you did, if at all. And you have to do it again. So the number one thing is to understand that if you want these abilities to be growing and you want to be spiritually developing, it has to come from that moral and ethical place. Anything else is actually just destroying your power and destroying yourself, and you will have to pay for that in your next incarnation. Okay, because our whole existence is not this one life. Right? It is many, 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 many different lives in which every single life that we live is a continuation of. So, as I mentioned earlier, you want to have a really strong meditation practice. The number one reason why we don't recognize the spiritual guidance that we're receiving is because our mind is not calm enough for it to literally drop in. And again, the head is moving too fast and the information's getting chopped up. It's just getting fragmented into a million pieces. You want that information, that stream, to come into your being whole. And in order to do that, you have to have a beautiful, nice, clear, flowing etheric body, beautiful, nice, clear, like crystal clear water that's completely harmonized and able to receive these forces. And you have to work really hard in your life to get that. And the first thing is to have a really strong meditation practice where you drop into your heart and you become very clear and you generate that love Christ energy in your heart and you let it radiate throughout your whole body. And that's actually what purifies you and spiritualizes you. Now, I talk about this in my Etherization of the Blood lecture as well. Again, spiritual development and the process of etherization even is the same thing as psychic development. And this also means that the more that you confront your inner trauma, right, through listening to your emotions, through actually going inward whenever you have a negative encounter, a negative experience, you have to go inward and you have to ask yourself really tough questions about why you're feeling bad, about why you're hurting. And you have to listen to your gut and to your body, and you have to have a relationship with your inner world where you're listening and you're healing. Because the other thing is that if there's too much trauma within the body will not spiritually develop. It'll just keep repeatedly drawing you back into your trauma again and again and again. And then once you face some of your trauma, spiritual abilities increase. So the more you heal, the more psychic you become, right? Okay. This is from another member. Have you experienced a Kundalini awakening as part of your spiritual unfolding? I have come across many people online who has an awakened Kundalini that clearly lack the ability to discern false light teachings. It might be that the Kundalini is the awakening of the feminine principle, the embodied consciousness, and that she becomes holy, the Holy Spirit, if we have awakened the heart, which is Christ, and mind, true Father. Your thoughts? Wow, great question here. So this is going back to what I said earlier, which is that we all incarnate with certain degrees of spiritual ability. And so when people, display psychic power, again, that can be sort of something that was developed in a prior life. But in this life, they may not have everything completely aligned. And so they could actually be destroying their psychic abilities by not practicing properly. So you can destroy your spiritual abilities by not practicing properly, by basically communicating with demonic forces. Okay, that's not going to be very good for you. And that's going to make it so it's harder and harder to spiritually connect, because there's deep confusion involved with communicating with these kinds of beings, and it will destroy or it can greatly damage your spiritual system overall. Okay. And so it's kind of like there's different levels to psychic ability, right? The first level of perception is something called the lower astral plane. On my channel, I'll sometimes use the anthroposophical term, which is the eighth sphere. But the first realm that surrounds the earth is called the eighth sphere, or the lower astral plane. And it is full of basically discordant entities that really can't move beyond the break of the moon. They're sort of stuck in between, if you will, the earth and the moon. And they live parasitically off of humanity. And their whole setup there is basically to create hierarchies on the planet that feed them. And so ultimately, it's very easy to be in communication with dark forces because they're actively seeking to speak through you, and they depend on humanity to exist. So a lot of people who just open up spiritually and they're not properly educated in occult science, in what the dark planes are, in what the light planes are, what the spiritual hierarchies are, if they're not properly educated in spiritual science, then they end up falling prey to these dark entities that basically are very close to the earth in their proximity. Now, that is technically being psychic. Like if you're communicating with a demon or a false light entity, yeah, you're technically receiving psychic information, but you're literally tapped in to a lower false light demonic stream. So you can be 100% psychic and spiritual, but it doesn't mean that you're tapping into a genuine higher stream. In order to do that, you have to have attunement, okay? Attunement comes through the heart and through connecting with the Christ essence within you, the force of Christ within your heart center. That's where the attunement comes from. And so you have to have that kindling and awakening of Christ in your heart center. And that gives you a certain access to higher planes, because the angelic realm is not going to force themselves on you. The demonic realm will. So you have to let that Christ energy radiate in your heart and through your whole body. And that gives you the resonance that can actually pierce through the eighth sphere and into the higher planes. And you have to, and you get better and better at it. So it comes on faster and faster and deeper until that is your default, right? And yes, the true mind, or the awakened mind, is the Father. It is the solar logos. It is the logos. And that's really what you want to be structuring yourself with. So you're 100% correct there. The Christ in the heart center is love. right? Love is going to always, it's funny how you actually, it's interesting. So the number one pieces of information that you're going to get in your life will not come from a teacher. It's not going to come from me. It's not going to come from any other teacher. The highest value and most significant information that you will receive will come from your own heart center and from the spiritual forces that are there guiding you every single day. That is the most powerful information that you will ever receive. And it will be there when you can generate love in your heart. Okay, that is the currency of the angels. It's the currency of the Christ realm, of the Christ forces. And so when you can radiate that, when you can have that in your heart, that means that you can access that higher plane and completely bypass these lower planes that are full of like the darker, the darker forces. Okay. So yes, another thing that you have to have that is the which catalyzes the mind and prepares the mind is you have to study, you have to be educated. You can't expect to just open your Kundalini and just suddenly be able to channel 100% great, and you're going to be able to see the entire layout of the universe. And you have to actually study. You have to actually study occult science so that you have the lexicon to understand what you're perceiving, right? So that's also part of the development of your mind, is feeding yourself with proper study, the right esoteric information, so that when you do interact with higher planes, you actually have the lexicon of information to understand what's going on. You're not just listening to some entities that are communicating with you and giving you information, just relying on everything they say. That's a red flag. No, you should be able to have all this information because you're already studying it through the wisdom traditions of, which you can choose which one you want to work with. Okay, this one is from Josephina. Josephina, what are the steps in becoming an angel? What a great question. So one of the, I think, most important teachings of our time is the teaching on the spiritual hierarchies, and that human beings are actually the 10th angel in the hierarchy of angels. Now, this is something that's not ever talked about, and we kind of view the cosmos in mainly a materialist way, which is completely wrong. It's completely wrong. And if you view the cosmos in a materialist way, you're going to enter into it from a state of delusion. So basically, the spiritual hierarchies, or the angels, are represented in the cosmos and in the planetary spheres, including the sun. And the whole solar system and the whole universe, really, but we focus on the solar system because our solar system is a microcosm of the universe, okay? The whole solar system is really a school for souls. Now, these souls are really angels, humanity, and even beneath us, elemental kingdoms, okay? Including the animal kingdom, including the plant kingdom. Angels at the top in the supernatural category, humanity as the harmonizer of the earth, or the angel of the earth. And then beneath humanity, you have the subhuman realms, which are elementals, animals, plants, and minerals. We are all functioning in one solar system school. So that means that animal consciousnesses, plant consciousnesses, mineral consciousnesses, and elementals will eventually, over time, their life wave will develop into a human being, which is the great guardian of the planet, right? And then eventually that human being will ascend into a solar being and become an angel. Now, this is the law of human and soul development. So on the supernatural side, we have 9 hierarchies of angels above us in sets of 3. Okay, 3, 3, 3. We're the 10th. All right. And so we are all evolving together with the cosmos. Okay, so that means that angels were in a human stage prior. Okay, and now they're angels. It means that we will become, and archangels are essentially at the level of that we will be when we reach Venus development. Angels are the level that we will be when we reach Jupiter development, which is the Earth's next incarnation, right? And the archai in the anthroposophical system, which is the class above archangel, is parallel to our Vulcan state, which is the last state of human and earthly development in the cycle. So there's actually a very precise system of human and planetary evolution. It's very precise. We don't have to guess at it. Okay, and so with that comes all the minute, small little teachings about ascension, about how to build your glorified etheric body, which is also called the resurrection body, which is the ascension body. You know, we always talk about in the New Age, ascension, that's resurrection. In esoteric Christianity, that is the mystery of resurrection, which is the glorified etheric body and the shedding of the physical body and going into a higher plane. Okay, so technically, now that we understand the solar system is really a school, right? Once we reach our final development of the planet Earth, okay, and right now we're in our most dense development. We're in our 4th incarnation of the Earth, and the deepest in matter right now, which is why it's so hard. We're then going to go into a Jupiter incarnation. So it's associated with the planet Jupiter, which is etheric. Okay. Then we're going to go into an astral incarnation, which is associated with Venus. Okay. Then we're going to go into a higher incarnation, which is a solar incarnation, which is associated with Vulcan. Okay. And it's actually it's not solar in the way that we know it, but it's sort of like you reach this stage of what's called in the Eastern traditions Atman, which is the complete spiritualization of your body. That's the in Vulcan stage, which is the 7th and final stage of earthly and human development. Now, that's when we would technically become an angel. That means that we've transcended matter. Okay, that means that we are complete, and that is sort of when we are done. And so that is the system. And in my opinion, the clearest system where that's described is the anthroposophical system, though that obviously also exists in the Eastern traditions as well, though it's more clear for Westerners, certainly in anthroposophy. Okay. This one is from Mary. What are the best practices to work with embedded Ahriman being? Ooh, good question. So Ahriman, and it's spelled Ahriman, is actually, for those of you who don't know, in the Steiner system, evil is split actually into 2. And these two concepts of evil are actually more precise than the duality of just dark and light. Because when we understand, evil or darkness, we really have to understand it not as a fragment, right? We have to understand it as understanding the entire development of the earth and certain forces that were cast down because they embody the shadow aspect of certain planetary forces and certain human forces, which is what Lucifer and Ahriman are. They're forces that are cast down because they really represent planetary forces and human forces that we must confront. And due to where we are in development, we've existed for so long that we actually have a kind of positive polarity and negative polarity of evil that we must confront within us. Now, Christ stands at the center of that. So Christ is the balancing point, and Ahriman is on one side and Lucifer is on the other. This is a key concept in anthroposophy. And once you begin to see it this way, it completely changes your view. It just makes everything so much more accurate than to just try to say that there's only one dark being. So the best practices to work with that harmonic essence, the first one is to understand what it is. The first one is to understand exactly what the harmonic forces are, and why they exist and how they operate. Because the biggest thing that keeps us trapped in negative patterns is lack of awareness, is ignorance. If we're ignorant, then darker forces can just kind of repeatedly permeate our consciousness and we don't really know any better. And they sort of command and control the deepest level of our mind. Okay. And so the first thing is to understand Ahriman. And I have a lecture, it's 3 hours long, and I explain the harmonic forces. But Ahriman is the force of materialization. Ahriman exists in dogmatism, dogmatic religion, dogmatic science. He expresses himself often through numbers. Ahriman is always trying to reduce everything into a more and more condensed, simplified, often numerical form, often reducing things to the point that they don't make sense anymore, and it becomes a dogmatic shell. And so the best work on this actually is in Rudolf Steiner's work, Lucifer and Ahriman. And a good way to take that information is actually through, there's a wonderful channel on YouTube, and it's called, I believe, Rudolf Steiner Audio. If I've gotten that wrong, please correct me in the chat. And this lovely gentleman has basically given all of these Steiner, read all of these Steiner lectures for free on his channel. And so I love to listen to that. And I highly recommend, if you don't feel like you have the time to read, but you're commuting or you're going for a walk, just pop in one of these lectures, with Lucifer and Ahriman is great. And just, that's a good way to take in the information. You're cleaning your house or whatever. Usually it's better to actually be focused on it, but you know the world we live in. Okay. This one is from Mary. What are the best practice? Oops, just did that. Just did that one. Excuse me. Okay, Sanjuli, do you think incarnations of Godhead are aware of who they are? Okay, so the Godhead really is the source from which we all derive. And this actually exists outside of our solar system. It exists outside of the zodiac. It's also called prime creator, primal instinct, primal source. There's lots of different words for it. But we are essentially all aspects of the Godhead. And as the solar system was created and the cosmos was created, we just become more and more individuated, right? And more dense, until in our earthly incarnation, we get to the halfway point of earthly development and we actually receive our I, which is our individuality. And it is from that reception of the I, or the divine spark, that we then work upon ourselves to become a sovereign, independent cosmic being, angel, essentially. So we are all incarnations of the Godhead, going through our process of development in different ways. There's people are all at different levels, right? Human beings are all at different levels. And then there's angelic hierarchies that are superhuman, right? And then there are the subhuman beings. So we're all moving in the cosmic wave of development together in different phases, right? In different life waves. But we're all moving together and we all originate from the Godhead. Okay, Mary Kish. What is the best way to get rid of an entity attachment? I've had a few clearings, but it is still here. Thank you so much. Great question. So the first thing that we have to grasp is somewhat of a challenging concept, which is that the spiritual world, or as they used to say in classical esoterica, the world of the dead, right? The angelic kingdoms and the world of the dead, they all share the same space that we do here on Earth. So in this way, the angelic kingdoms are not somewhere up there, and the hell realms are not really somewhere down there. It's all happening and it's all playing out here. Now, human beings are vessels. We, in our very design, are designed to basically connect with higher streams of spiritual forces, because we're ultimately always tapped in and always connecting to God in the higher planes and also the lower ones. Our entire being is always overlapping with that. And so according to our mind, right, we can be attracting to us kind of healthy, positive forces, or we can attract to us kind of lower forces. And this all depends on the state of our mind. It can also depend on past lives and karma. We have certain vulnerabilities from ancestral wounding and ancestral karma. And basically, at any given time, we're always interacting with positive and negative forces. In this way, when you see something like an exorcism or severe possession where the person isn't even there anymore, that's not typical. That's like the most extreme form of entity attachment. It does exist, but it's not typical. What is typical is to have just different attachments that are, you know, trying to work through you because they desperately want to form. And so the only way that you can really work through that is you have to understand your own mind, and you have to understand your pain, and you have to understand your trauma. Because where you are traumatized, okay, where you are in pain is where these entities are going to attach. Think of your aura as like a giant mirror, all right? And so whatever part of your life needs healing, there may come a lower entity that will attach to you that is a direct embodiment of what you're struggling with. So in that way, that dark entity does a shadow dance with you, where it will be the exact embodiment of a darkness that is within you. Okay? So this is why in old school mystery initiations, there would usually be some kind of darkness initiation where you literally were sitting in darkness. And when you do that with no light, basically all of your fears and all of your pain comes up, and then you can confront all of these lower entities that are essentially attached and kind of tethered into your pain. In other words, the more that we heal, the less points of attachment dark entities have. Does that make sense? So this is why taking responsibility for your healing and your spiritual development and just making that your routine, making meditation your routine, making inward self-reflection your routine, and also just making it a real habit to go inward, and that'll really help, because it's not about never having an attachment. It's about being able to go inward and honestly and truly feel what's going on in there, and not keep shoving your emotions down, not keep shoving your trauma down, because that's just going to make it harder and harder to really feel yourself. You have to really be able to feel differences in your body, differences in your energy, right? So a lot of people just live in a kind of an ignorance to what's going on, constantly shoving things down. And that makes it very easy for attachments to happen. So it's really directly related to healing. Okay. This is a member question. Can deceased loved ones appear as guides in form such as a mockingbird, a cardinal, etc.? If so, are the messages up to the individual, thus personal in their very nature? Yeah, so if you have a deceased relative, it's very common for them to appear, especially if they've been deceased recently. There's a period where they can appear to you. They can appear to you in a dream. They can appear to you actually in your room whenever you're just, sitting around. And sometimes it's not clairvoyantly that you see them. It can be a smell. You can smell them. You can just sense them. It can be a knowing that they're there, right? And they can also use animals to appear to you. A lot of people will see cardinals or birds. Birds have always been a symbol of the soul, especially the soul after death traveling through the underworld. Birds have always represented that. Think of the Bennu bird in Egypt in Resurrection, right? So birds, the wings have always represented heaven. And so you may always get feathers. You might get coins that fall on the ground, even though we don't use coins as much, but that used to also be really popular. And yeah, if someone has passed away, they may influence animals. You may get something that appears in your home like a feather, things like that. It is, and they can do that. And it's actually part of how they let go of this world is by doing little things like this. Yeah. Travis, what do you know about the effects that suicide might have on a being? Yes. Okay. So this is a very controversial question, and it's a very sensitive question. And I answered it a while ago, and it was interesting because it directly confronts a sort of fluffy New Age ideology that basically says so basically a very common belief is that it doesn't really matter if you commit suicide, right? You just go on and you just reincarnate again. It doesn't really have an effect on your soul, on the timing of your soul or anything like that. That's not actually the case, in my opinion. And also in occult science, we know that if a soul commits suicide, they'll actually be bound to the earth and bound to the earthly forces until the end of their natural life. So time doesn't really quite work in the same way, but they'll be sort of still bound to the planet and to the earth until their life would have naturally ended. And so in that way, it's not how the New Age typically says it, where it doesn't matter if you take your life or anything like that. It does. It doesn't. You don't operate the same if you do take your life. I understand this is a sensitive issue, but there's several different books on this. It's mentioned in Anthroposophy about suicide. Dion Fortune has a good book called, I think it's called Through the Gates of Death, which is a modern retelling of, I think, the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Because back, our ancestors viewed death as a very serious, a very serious thing. It's only in recent times that we've begun to see death as more like a lullaby, more like a whatever we want it to be. In the past, death was a very specific process of going into the underworld, of processing your life in specific ways. As I mentioned in Electric Apocalypse, if you look at the Buddhist tradition and the Naraka realms, and the whole process of death is very complex. So there's laws around how we die, right, and how we process this life. There's cosmic laws around it, and so those are some very good. That's a very good book for it. It's mentioned in, I think, Anthroposophy and Theosophy as well. And so it's not the same thing. Suicide is not the same thing as a normal death. It's not processed as a normal death. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person is in like pain and torment or anything like that, but there is a bit of a holdup, and it is not the same process. Okay. This is a member question. Oh, also, there's often a lot of confusion. Murder and suicide often create a very deep state of confusion for the soul when it passes. Because obviously, when we're in our soul state, we have a much different perspective, and so there can be a lot of confusion created in those situations. This one is a member question. Hi, Gigi. I was wondering if Ahrimanic spirits hate it when a human dies due to them being cast out of the body. Of the body, why do they encourage human sacrifice? Is it because they need to harvest energy in the short term to build the long-term plan of the new atom that doesn't lie? This was actually one of the questions that I asked when I came across that understanding that one of the things that demonic entities really don't want is they don't want the human body to die. Because when the human body dies, the demonic entity is basically cast out of the body, and then it has to find another one, which is really inconvenient. So part of the whole demonic agenda is to create bodies that live forever, that these demonic spirits can basically enter into and stay in and never have to leave, and basically hijack the planet, right? But there's also another element that we have to consider, which is that all demonic entities and Ahrimanic entities are parasitic. So they also require energy. So they also require sacrifice for certain things, feeding, but also to open certain portals to the lower planes, sacrifice is necessary. So that also has to be factored in. So their goal is sort of like human sacrifice. Unfortunately, there goes the channel, but this kind of thing in the dark arts is necessary, because it creates a portal into the lower planes through the death channel that's opened. It feeds lower elementals that they enslave, okay? And also it just allows this back and forth. So they have to have that. But ultimately, they want there to be forms on the planet, which I call the new atom, which is a transhumanist form, right? That never dies, that basically these lower entities can perpetually live. It's also an inhuman form, right? It's a subhuman. Transhumanism and things like Neuralink, that creates a subhuman form. It is an inversion. And so we're going to be told that it's a superhuman form for all these weird materialistic reasons that actually don't matter anything to the soul at all, that actually harm the soul. But ultimately, that new atom will be this transhumanist form that is completely created through black magic and dark magic, that will allow these darker entities that require a subhuman form, because they're subhuman beings. They can't live in an organic form anyway. It's becoming harder and harder for them to live in an organic form. This is why we see this excessive move towards CRISPR and genetic modification. And the bizarre Sitchin and Daniken work that's like saying you're created by flesh and blood aliens and all this kind of stuff, that's all about genetic modification. That is the crux of that movement, is to prepare humanity to accept genetic modification and transhumanism. That's one leg of it, okay? So that new atom is so that there are bodies that are created. And eventually, how they think it's going to happen is eventually they think that they're going to be able to kind of permanently create this hell world through hyper electrification of the earth, right? Through radiating the earth and humanity, through creating this lower human form that's a transhumanist form, they think they're going to kind of freeze the earthly development and essentially live on the earth. And eventually you won't necessarily need, certain things, like sacrifices perhaps won't be needed as much, because you're literally trying to pull the world and change the world so that it is a direct embodiment of the subplanes of hell, of the eighth sphere. That's what the eighth sphere is. So that's the goal, is so that they can basically create bodies to live in the eighth sphere permanently, and to have this hive mind system that you literally see in the Matrix. So that's what the long-term goal is. And so when we see people like Elon Musk, who seem to be doing good things for free speech, that is in true Antichrist nature and true Ahrimanic nature. That is so this individual can gain your trust, right? If there's no way that he's going to sell you the brain chip, space god narrative, if you think that he is a bad guy. You have to trust him. So a lot of the political movements and freedom that this individual does is literally because there's a more important agenda to the group that he represents, which is the transhumanism agenda. The political stuff doesn't really matter. It's just he'll take whatever position gains popularity, all right? He never champions an issue before it's popular, but always after he does. This is just the reality. Because no human being that wants to put a chip in your brain and that's telling you that that's the evolution that we have to have because AI is all consuming and there's no way to live without it. This is a lie. It's sick. Of course, there's a life without AI. It's called spirit. It's called Christ. It's called natural living, but it's being painted as though we have to merge with this thing. It's a lie. Don't fall for it. It's the transhumanist new Adam lie. And we have to really get to the point where we elevate ourselves out of just constantly talking about politics and the mundane level of things. We have to also factor in the spiritual, occult, religious reality of the people at the top, the permanent government, the elite. What do they believe spiritually? They believe in the new Adam. They're Ahrimanic and Luciferian. That's what they are. You have to when you understand the religious belief system, you're much more powerful. So we can't keep playing in the shadow waters of politics all the time. We have to actually discuss their occult beliefs, because that's how you stop it. That's how you stop it. Because everything that happens politically, and I mean everything, is a small little game to catch people's souls. Okay? To basically create the eighth sphere. That is what they want more than anything. And we have to understand it's a spiritual battle that we are in. I know it's hard to talk about, but it's harder when we don't talk about it. All right. This one is from Peony. And you said, "Hi, Gigi. My dad passed away yesterday, and I wanted to ask you for some tips on how to deal with it and any information you think is important to know about post-death. Thank you and love you so much." Aw, all my love your way, Peony. I'm so sorry for your loss. The thing that really is the only thing that really heals is time. And that's hard to hear. But it's really going to be time that allows you to process this. So you have to give yourself time, allow yourself to feel. And one thing that can be nice as a little ritual is to light a white candle and pray every day for his soul, and pray every day for him to be loved and guided in his transition into the higher worlds. That's a very nice thing to do, is to light a little candle and then pray for that individual, that they may be guided, that they may be loved. Because the one thing that we don't often know is that when a soul is passing after death, they absolutely can receive prayers, and they can hear you, and they can sense your care, your thoughts, your love. And so it's actually very effective to pray for people that we've lost. And when they're in their dying process, it actually really helps them. And so that's something that you can do. But as for the pain, only time will ever lessen that. But I think it also helps to be very grateful for the good memories, and allow yourself to heal, allow yourself to have that time. Okay, Isaiah. Okay. What are the esoteric viewpoints on homosexuality? Why is it practiced in some ritualistic teachings and in other religions? Why is it opposed? I can't actually talk about this on YouTube. If you want to know the ritualistic side of this, so I'm going to go over, I'm going to just have to move on from that question, because I know I can't say certain words or talk about certain things. Okay. This next question is from Barry Fleming. Nietzsche seemed to grok something essential in the greatest weight. Essentially, this idea of eternal reoccurrence. What it feels like is the idea of amor fati, love of our fate, love of ourselves, no matter what has happened or what is to come. What is your take on fate? How much does free will and play into something that could be preordained at a certain level? New awareness in particular, fated experience that shifts incrementally. That's a long one. Okay. So yeah, we have essentially certain themes and certain things that are preordained. And we have a certain, people call it like a soul contract. We have a certain soul contract that it's kind of like archetypal experiences that we will experience in our life. Certain energies that we're going to be exposed to. Certain cosmic energies we're going to be exposed to. But there's also the free will element, where even though we're exposed to these scheduled forces, we can decide what we do with them, okay? We can decide how much of that how much responsibility we want to take on, essentially, how much we're going to hide from something. So there is the idea of these fated archetypal experiences in our life, and they absolutely exist. There is a fate that goes on. And then there's also a kind of free will within that, where some people can have a certain fated experience that was scheduled to happen. And it is an eternal reoccurrence from past lives, but they can kind of get the most out of it by responding in an exalted way, or they can be destroyed by it or get the least out of it by not responding properly. So that's kind of the idea of fate and free will. Some things are absolutely fated. Some things you're absolutely going to be exposed to, but the degree is basically up to your life. Okay. All right. Please, can you explain what baptism is in esoteric Christianity? Okay, so in esoteric Christianity, there's sort of these different initiations. You have the baptism, you have transfiguration, you have crucifixion. And within esoteric Christianity, these are actually all different things the soul goes through. And so when we see it told in Christ's life, we're actually looking at something that happened physically. Jesus did exist. These things did happen. But we're also looking at a metaphor for things that our soul goes through in its initiation process. Okay? So this is why you'll see the concept of baptism, crucifixion, transfiguration, and all these different initiations. You'll see them in theosophy. You'll see them kind of in the Eastern traditions too, because they represent something, but they're really streamlined and they're really made very clear and very bold in esoteric Christianity. All right. So if you can imagine the baptism as sort of like if you were to take a seed and you were to dunk it in water, this is like the ultimate preparation for the seed to germinate. So if you can think about you and dunking you in water, you're now prepared to germinate. You're now prepared to receive Christ. So in Christ's life, when he becomes baptized, he is receiving the Christ within him. He's receiving the first impulse of the Christ. Now that doesn't come into its full expression until the transfiguration, right? But when he is being baptized and he's dunked in the water, this is you receiving Christ. This is the individual receiving and fully attuning to Christ. The astral body and the higher bodies are now prepared to receive Christ. So that's what the baptism is. All right. So this also means that, like, when you see people being baptized, that is them receiving the Christ within them, right? That's what that ritual is. Okay, Steph, was there Christ consciousness on Mars when humans existed there? So one of the fascinating things, as I mentioned, about the solar system being a school is that there are humans that basically exist within every planetary sphere. And so there's a human form for Mars. There's a human form for Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, and even planets that are essentially outside of our visible sight, like Vulcan, right? We don't see the planet Vulcan, but there is a form for that is a completely astral, it's a completely astral human form. And the reason why we don't necessarily see life on other planets is because that planet's life wave is in an obfuscation, or it's in a period of death or pralaya relative to our Earth. So for us, the Earth is sort of like, so for the Earth, and from our perspective, much of the cosmos is kind of like a graveyard. There's not a whole bunch of life on the 3D plane. The Earth is sort of like the sphere that is radiating that. But at certain points, planetary spheres swing into life in certain planes. And so these beings are not called aliens. You know, there's nothing alien about them. They're called angels, and they're beings within the spiritual hierarchy. And their development is completely related to ours in a very specific way that we can track, know, and understand. Okay. So Mars had life on it. Mars had human beings on it. Now, the human beings didn't look as we look completely. And the human being wasn't as complex on Mars as it is on Earth. On Earth, the earthly human being is really, in our solar system's development thus far, the most complex. Okay, so the human being on Mars was sort of, in a way, it was a precursor. It's a little bit of an earlier, and it was etheric. So the people on Mars were really etheric and only quasi-physical, really, only kind of physical. And so how we interact with Mars, the shell that is Mars, is we're really kind of seeing the period of Mars before Christ. So the Christ impulse reaches Mars later compared to where we are after the Earth. That's my understanding. Earth receives Christ before Mars does. And if you adhere to the anthroposophical teachings, the entity that is Buddha actually becomes Christ on Mars. Because remember, souls are going through an initiation in the solar system. Okay? To be the Christ of a planet, as Jesus was for ours, is a certain level of initiation for a human being, for a soul. Okay? And now Buddha is reaching that on Mars. So Buddha will be the Christ on Mars. And one day, as any human being evolves in their journey, you may be a Christ. Okay, that's kind of the whole goal, if that's something that your soul wants to do. So the difference there is that the Christ being that Jesus took on was actually an extra solar force. Okay, it was actually coming from even beyond the sun through the sun. All right, that's something that we need to understand. He's a solar force, but in a sense was connecting to something even larger than our own sun. Okay, and then the other levels of initiation, Buddha, Bodhisattva, are reaching the sun. Okay, so there is a level of initiation for the soul, and we were just talking about baptism, the level of baptism, the level of transfiguration, crucifixion. These are all levels of initiation that the soul goes through. The soul experiences in many different lives, right? So eventually, we have certain opportunities that we can take that are sacrificial opportunities, such as the Christ, such as the Buddha, right? But a Buddha is a level of initiation for a soul in the solar system, okay, on a planet. Christ, to be Christed, truly Christed, with the highest solar being, is a level of initiation for a soul. It's a very high spiritual master, okay? And this process goes through and affects all planets in the solar system in their own way, but the level of development of the soul is the same, okay? The souls are all, this is why things like astrology work. It's because Earth is really, it's a unique planet, but it's still also always processing the energy from other spheres. And you're always processing energy that you've had from lives on other spheres, right? Okay. And for those of you who don't know, I have a whole series called Mars Mysteries, which speaks of a very, very unusual period of the Earth's history around between Atlantis and Lemuria, where there was an influx of these Martian beings, these Martian souls, these Martian individuals, which actually is going to play a big role in the Earth's future, is understanding the Mars impulse, what I call the Mars impulse. Just as the Venus impulse was imperative to understand in Lemuria, the Mars impulse is imperative to understand Atlantis and understand even our own period now. Okay. This is from Jim Bo9. Have you ever had an out-of-body experience, and how do you protect yourself when you do? Yes, I've had many out-of-body experiences. I don't work out of body. I work from being clearly anchored within my body. You know, I know some people tend to like go out of their body and do psychic stuff, but I really want to be in body fully and fully aware and present when I'm working. So it's not a working space for me. But I have had these sort of out of body experiences. I think sleeping is essentially one big astral journey, one big out of body experience. So that means we all are out of body for for 8 hours a night or 6 hours a night or whatever. We're all just having one big out of body astral experience. And you know what? Like, I always say this about protection in the astral plane is that the best thing that you can do is to be focused in your daily life. So, how we experience the astral plane, including when we sleep, is basically a mirror of our mind throughout the day. So if you're very distracted, if you're very disassociated, right? If you just keep scrolling and you don't really care what you're looking at, if you're just allowing yourself to be pulled here and there and you're not focused, then that's the worst thing you can do when you're doing psychic work, or if you're experiencing psychic attacks or bad dreams. The best thing you can actually do is to remain very focused during the day on the task at hand. Don't try to do 5 things at once or 2 things at once. Be completely embodied and be very, very focused. Because what that translates to in the astral plane when you're doing astral projection work or you are dreaming is that it allows you to basically control your environment, right? If you're not able to stay focused during the day on a task and you're allowing your mind to be pulled into all these different directions, that's what really makes it hard to do psychic work, because you don't have the control of your mind, which means you don't have control over your astral body in the mental plane, the astral plane. Okay, Sierra. Am I too focused on what the sun looks like and feels like when I want to be initiated by it? Or is there a template I can use so that I know I'm taking the right steps? Yeah, so this is a great question. The sun and the forces that it radiates, which are really not the physical forces of the sun, are sort of like the lowest, most material forces. They do play a part, but when we're receiving the spiritual forces of the sun, it's not like we're receiving it into our skin. You're receiving it into your etheric body. You're receiving it into your spiritual body, and it is changing and shifting your spiritual body. Okay, so it's light on light. It's your inner light attuning with the sunlight, with the starlight. Okay, that's the light on light. The physical body, and that it is getting obviously some healing energy and vitamin D from the physical aspect, but it's not really the physical aspect that is changing us. As I've mentioned before, the trend in the new age and ufology is basically to say that aliens have created humanity, and that's why we've had all of these shifts. That's just removing Christ. That's just removing the sun essence. The reason why we evolve and we have these jumps in consciousness is because of the spiritual hierarchies, the angelic hierarchies, and also due to the solar force on our etheric body, which essentially repatterns it as it repatterns the earth. So it's actually a very deeply spiritual process, right? But it is not a physical. The physical mirror of that is simply that we get vitamin D, but the actual spiritual information and initiation happens just by existing. And the best thing that you can do is simply, again, it's if you can create the essence of Christ in your heart, the spirit of Christ within your heart, you are creating the spirit of the sun in your heart as well. Because if you were if we had the ancient Atlantean consciousness, the ancient Lemurian consciousness in our minds, and we were looking at the sky, what we would see is beings. We would look at the planet Venus and we would see beings. We would see Venus beings. We'd see spiritual beings that represented Venus, and we would know what it meant. When we look at the sun, we would see beings. Okay? This is why when you look at Greece and Rome, the planetary beings are portrayed as gods. They're portrayed as the planets are portrayed as beings, as gods, because when they looked up into the sky, that's what they saw. Now we just see, material bodies, because we've sunk so deeply into materialism that we just see like this physical planet. But that's not what we saw when we looked up into the sky. Even 3,000 years ago, we didn't just see physical stars. We saw a physical body, but overlaid, we saw beings, and we could get information about these beings. That's why myths exist, is because we were living in a kind of clairvoyant state where it wasn't just dead physical objects that we're seeing. That's where we are now. We're in a time of death, really, because we only look at the most external shell and become fixated and obsessed with it, never really considering its multitudes and higher worlds. It's absolute insanity. So it's materialistic insanity. So why I'm mentioning that is because if you were to look at the sun, you would see the most advanced spiritual beings that you could imagine radiating in the sun. And so those beings are also called the Christ beings. They were also called the seven Elohim. Okay. They have been raining down upon us and connecting with humanity for a long time. And so these are the solar beings. These are the Christ beings. These are the Christ and the sun. And so you have the ability to create within your heart a sun. Okay, you can create a sun, a little Christ sun in your heart. And that's what you want to do. And that's going to allow you to resonate with the Christ externally that is represented in the sun. So you want to create that essence within your own heart. Does that make sense? It's all about resonance. Okay, this is the member question. The situation of my father makes me sad, and I don't like to help him. He's 82, diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Seeing how his overall state declines now, including trembling episodes, and that his partner puts him in the hospital impacts me a lot. I'm concerned that he gets stuck in the lower astral, goes into transhumanist timelines in his next life. How could I help him currently and after passing? Yes, so generally when people begin to develop Alzheimer's and develop dementia, how myself and also many mediums see that is that the soul is actually beginning to pull away. It's already beginning to make its transition. And that's why things are not firing quite well. And it's almost like the person is sort of a shell of themselves, and certain memories are firing and certain, reactions are being had. And, but it's almost like it's not fully there anymore. So that's actually how many mediums will view that. And now the only thing that you can really do is just be very loving and very supportive of this individual. And that's going to allow them to go through this, whatever transitions, whatever healing he is doing. And so it's very difficult also in caring with an elderly person, if you don't have, full control over their life and there's someone else that's sort of interfering, because it can make you feel very helpless. And it's very difficult to see someone that you love struggling and then not be able to fully help. It's a very helpless feeling. And I completely understand that, and I can really sympathize with that, especially if it's obviously your father, But what I would do is sometimes in these situations where they're so meaningful and they're so important, but you don't have a whole lot of control in them, you really just have to acknowledge that and say, Christ, God, guide me. And if anything needs to be done in this situation, please guide me and please make it clear to me. I want to help. I want to be a force of love. I want to help my dad. Please show me how. Please make it clear to me. And then once you say that prayer, you have to let it go. And you have to trust that in the coming days or even in your dreams, you're going to get guidance. And then you follow that guidance, because the worst thing that you can do is to sit there with a broken heart and a twisted up heart, because you feel powerless, right? It's incredibly difficult to go through. That's why we pray. That's why we call upon God and angels, Christ. And once we pray, we let it go. And we try to live in a serene way, in a loving way. We don't suppress any emotions that come up. But once you pray on it, you got to let it go. And if there's an action that you're meant to take, then you take that action, right? When it's inspired to you. But sometimes the hardest lesson in life is to let things, is to be a sort of support from afar, and to come in when you're truly needed, right? Because from what you wrote, it sounds like you may not have the ability to fully control his situation. And then after passing, I would suggest the candle, right, where you light a candle for him and you pray for him and send him love and well thoughts. And of course, they receive that very well after death. I think you mentioned, yeah. So it's just prayer at this point. If you don't have a lot of control in a situation, you really just have to give it up to prayer. It's really all we can do, but it is very frustrating, right? Because we want to take action. Okay. This is from Anne. Hi, Gigi. I know you've covered this before, but I'm confused about it. If we suddenly have aliens showing up on Earth, are they real or from the 8th sphere or even human technology? Thank you. Yes, Anne, I think the alien issue is probably one of the most convoluted, confusing issues that exists in spirituality. So what people call aliens is really a myriad of different things. Some of what people call an alien experience is clearly a spiritual experience. It would be categorized as a demonic experience or an angelic experience even 70 years ago. But now, today, there is this huge push to suddenly get rid of our understanding about the spiritual hierarchies and about angels and demons, which has been the teaching that has existed in pretty much every single religion and tradition for thousands of years. We're going to throw that away now. And we're going to call the phenomenon alien. And we're going to completely rewrite the phenomenon in a materialist way. And the weird thing is that as this phenomenon is being rewritten, where now every spiritual being is an alien, suddenly all the spiritual feats are done through technology. So you see this weird thing where, a great structure wasn't built because of the force of a human being. It was an alien, and it was done through advanced technology. And so with the alien God ideology and with this alien movement, suddenly all spiritual feats are replaced with these aliens that had advanced technology. So this is just like transhumanism, where a spiritual ability that you develop through earning it is now replaced with a technology like Neuralink or some kind of other technology. So the alien God movement is all about replacing spiritual development, the spiritual hierarchies, true spiritual knowledge, with a false materialist cosmology around aliens and, weird, bizarre, spiritualized description of other planets that are also completely materialistic and that don't resemble any kind of real esoteric teaching. And so really we're in a very dark period where there's a concerted effort to use the word alien and extraterrestrials and even NHI to basically rewrite stuff we already know. And the only reason why that exists, why it's happening, is so that you cannot discern what a demonic entity is. The only reason why anyone would want to change a system is to not allow people to use that system to discern what a dark being is. It's a way of creating confusion. And it's very obvious for anyone who actually understands the spiritual hierarchies, the subhuman planes. It's very clear. But if people are just entering into the conversation through ufology, they don't understand spiritual science or cult science, they're going to come into this bizarre system of alien gods and alien creator gods and advanced technology that does everything. It's a trap, essentially. So ultimately, when it comes to what is classified as alien experiences, probably 90 some percent of what people call abductions. So this is being pulled out of your bed at night, moving through the roof. That's an astral experience. Most people's encounters with gray aliens, Nordic-looking aliens, or Pleiadians, they are astral experiences. It's a spiritual experience. Very, 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 very few alien encounters actually include somebody seeing a ship, physically touching it, and being physically there. Now, when you're having an astral experience in a dream or in your bedroom, the astral plane is a real plane. The lower astral plane is a real plane. So it can feel to you like a physical experience, right? Because you're in this extremely lucid state, but it is a spiritual experience. It's no different than in the Celtic faiths about how the Celtic traditions, how they would have the changeling. The story of the changeling, or of people being pregnant and having their babies taken, that is just like the modern day hybridization narrative. That there's all these, demonic looking skinny beings that are taking your babies away. That is nearly identical to the changeling in Irish folklore. Okay, now this is something that was brought up by many different ufologists, how they entered into the studying extraterrestrial phenomenon thinking it was an outside force from another planet. But then when you actually look at it, what we're doing is we're renaming spiritual forces that have always existed as part of the planet's development. So elemental forces, angels, demonic entities. We're naming those things aliens. And in doing that, trying to create an entirely new system of classification that basically just hides the fact that a lot of that is just demonic deception. It's literally just beings from the lower planes posing as beings of light, these different things going on, because the number one thing that demonic entities need is a form. And that's why the hybridization narrative exists, is because it's literally about creating forms. That's why the golem teaching exists, the homunculus. It's literally creating forms for lower beings to eventually incarnate. It's the new Adam, okay? That's what the whole alien stuff is all about. Why get rid of the teachings that we've used for thousands of years in every tradition? Why just not use it? Like I see these conversations where it's like, angels exist and then aliens also. It's this weird recreation of a new cosmology, because the forces that are running that propaganda don't want to use traditional cosmology, the teaching of the spiritual hierarchies and angels and demonic forces in the subrealms. They don't want to use that because people would look at what's going on and immediately be like, that's a demonic force. It's a subhuman being. They can't use the original system of classification of different spiritual beings because people would immediately be able to tell that it's a demonic entity. So that's why you get this whole bizarre scene in the New Age and ufology that's all about like materialistically categorizing things, calling beings that are angels aliens, calling demonic beings aliens. And then the other part of it that gets really weird, that is also part of the new Adam, is that there are actually people on the planet within secret aspects of the government that actually create these different forms. They create these golems. Now, these are the abduction cases where you hear about this being that's like a robot, right? Like they look at them and they realize that the being that they're interacting with is a robot. Now, these are usually called MILABs or military abductions. That's not an alien. That is literally a kind of robot, hybrid, cyborg thing that was created in a lab and is interacting with people. Now, why would anybody do that? Well, that has to do with the new atom. That has to do specifically with a genetic line from Atlantis that is seeking to survive any way it can. Okay. So it's about the degeneration of genetics, and it does have to do with Mars. It does have to do with Atlantis and certain beings that exist within the earth and within hidden areas of the earth that are dying and needing to be brought into the human life wave. So there's a whole aspect of things on the dark occult side that don't get talked about that seem absolutely ridiculous because humanity is kept at such a low level of knowledge on purpose. So again, some things that people say are aliens are not aliens. It's literally beings that are crypto-terrestrials. They are living, they're actually more associated with sort of these fallen beings from the Atlantean epoch. They're from a period of the earth. So under the moniker of alien, there's a lot of things going on. And a bunch of different spiritual phenomenon and real physical phenomenon is being conflated and simplified and reduced to aliens. And then from that meaningless reduced form, a new cosmology is trying to be eked out with these weird galactic history stories and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't work. And we're going to find out eventually that it doesn't work and have to return to the original system anyway. So we may as well just learn the spiritual science and let that run its course. So a lot of things going on in the circus that is disclosure and the circus that is the alien spiritual stuff. It's a lot of bizarre propaganda in one. And we just have to be able to recognize that and come into a system of understanding the cosmos, of understanding the planetary spheres, understanding spiritual beings, understanding the prior eras of the earth that's actually meaningful to us. That's what we're really craving anyway. But this is a false thing that's being brought in so that we don't come into this meaningful remembrance and understanding that are the real teachings. It's a distraction. And it always, always, always includes genetic modification, hybridization, and technology. And that's how you know it's an antichrist impulse. That's how you know that it is not a real thing. Because that's not how human beings really operate or evolve. Okay. So in other words, some aliens are what people call aliens. Some of that is literally demonic entities from the 8th sphere. Okay, that's what some of that is. But there's also dark magicians on the planet that create forms so that these dark entities can enter into these forms and do their bidding. That's called the rite of the golem or the rite of the homunculus. This has been going on for thousands of years. Okay, they've always been trying to incarnate these demonic forces into these bodies, even back in Atlantis. I have a video called The Mad Scientists of Atlantis that shows that this has always been what they're about, is trying to create this new atom, trying to create forms in which these demonic entities can operate and walk the earth. That didn't stop. It's still going on. But they like to call them aliens and do all this weird stuff to get genetic information. It's a whole big thing. But when you stop framing it as being alien and being kind of a bunch of different little things being packaged as that, then it starts to make sense, because the earth also does not operate in our level of development as it did in Atlantis or Lemuria, meaning things can't really come and go as they once did in the solar system school. And that's a whole other conversation, is what is possible when it comes to beings actually entering into the earth. It's not an open system, right? Which is also something that is often considered. So anyways, there's so much to say on it, really. And I've gone into it, quite honestly. If you have more questions about this, I highly recommend signing up for my premium website. There is probably, I don't know, like there's hundreds of hours of me answering questions around this, and they're all timestamped, so you can just listen to the little segments. And I have gone into this so deep, and a lot of these questions on a really deep level on my private platform. So if you enjoy this, you want to know more, absolutely go and sign up. It's only $9.99 a month, and you get Q&As, you get forums, you get a community, and it's honestly so much fun. So if you're liking this, do consider supporting my work in that way. Okay, Logan. Are new souls constantly created, or has there always been the same number who reincarnate? So this is why it's really important to not see the earth as like a fragment, but we have to see the earth and humanity as having this long process of evolution. Now, I talk about this in my Esoteric Secrets of Disclosure series in the first 2 lectures. But when we can see that the human being and the planet is really evolving over literally billions and billions of years, you get a sense of what the soul actually is and how long it takes for the human being to actually technically become ensouled and actually materialize a body and the right organs to actually be ensouled. Or in anthroposophy, we would say to have an I, to have an individuality. In order to truly have a soul, you have to be an individual. You have to be an individuality. This is called the I in anthroposophy. And with the I, that divine spark, you actually catalyze and develop your soul life after life after life after life. So technically, there can be human beings walking the earth that technically don't really have much of a soul. They're still functioning in a group consciousness. They're not individuals. They haven't individuated from the collective yet. Now, there's different paths for those souls in the solar system school, depending on the nature of their being, depending on why they are where they are. Okay, there's always going to be people or souls that seem ahead and advanced. There's always going to be people that seem behind, and that has to do with the life wave and all of the different transmigrations of souls that can incarnate on a planet from different levels of development. So really, we say that someone truly has a soul when they're an individual, and especially when that individuality, that ego, becomes spiritualized or aligned with God, aligned with Christ. That's really the deeper teaching there. Okay, Benjamin Brewer. Would you recommend any Christian churches above others? Is the Christian community Steiner founded a good path? Yeah, so Rudolf Steiner, it's really interesting with Steiner because he did so much in his life that you have biodynamic gardening, which is basically a very advanced form of gardening that doesn't require chemicals and pesticides. It allows you to grow food and farm with the rhythm of the cosmos and the earth. And so some people actually know Rudolf Steiner from just biodynamic gardening, and they have no idea about all of this all of this deep information about like new Jupiter and the astral body and how deep and intense his esoteric work is. They just know him through biodynamic gardening, which is so incredible because actually his work on biodynamic gardening is actually extremely esoteric and has to do with cosmic forces and all this. It's incredible. And then some people know him through Steiner schools, or I believe the Campbell Hill schools, and they don't know the depth of him as an esoteric Christian. They don't know, Christianity as mystical fact. So it's really interesting how people can enter into the Steiner work from wherever they are, but they may not know about this whole other aspect of him that is out there in the world. So I would say that, also with philosophy of freedom, you can enter into that, and it's a completely philosophical work. It's not really talking about Lemuria, So there is at the heart of the Steiner work is Christ and is esoteric Christianity. And Steiner absolutely revelated on the Christ impulse. Theosophy wrote about Christ, but the Christ impulse and the nature of Christ, the meaning of Christ in our world from an esoteric standpoint really comes to blossom. It really comes to bloom in anthroposophy. Theosophy didn't quite bring it there. Anthroposophy really does, and that's what sets apart Theosophy and anthroposophy. And so that said, there isn't really, to my knowledge, there isn't a church, a church that's out there that is like a Steiner Christian church. I don't believe that there may be something like groups that meet, but the whole point of esoteric Christianity, I believe in Steiner's mind, was the concept of anthroposophia, which means that it is within you primarily, and it's to get, your human organism to remember Christ first within you, and then to learn about it in the world. So it's a little bit of a different approach. And I don't have any Christian churches particularly to recommend, because I feel like how you worship is really up to you, and you have to make that decision, from your heart. But I do think that in anthroposophy, there are some deep initiating mystical facts about Christ that are for this time. They are for this era, and they're going to become absolutely paramount in understanding how the Christ impulse is going to exist in the future. So how you interact with that should be up to you and through the essence of your own heart. There's no churches that I know of that are under, Steiner's moniker. Okay. Oliver Milliner, thoughts on geocentrism and flat Earth? So one of the fascinating things is that there's the idea in esoterica that as soon as we began to use the heliocentric model, so the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun, that it's the marker of materialism and things basically going askew, because it doesn't really matter if we're revolving around the sun. Esoterically, that doesn't really matter. Actually, esoterically, it can create the wrong picture of the soul. So it's the materialist impulse that sees the Earth as revolving around the sun. It doesn't matter if it does or not, but it doesn't allow the proper spiritual understanding, because we live on the Earth. We are of the Earth. And so the Ptolemaic model or the geocentric model is actually the correct esoteric model. You can't do any equations from the sun being central. All the equations have to be with the Earth being central. And then everything is technically another aspect of the Earth. It's also another aspect of the sun. But because we're not Christ, we're not living in the sun, then it's very difficult to have a solar-centric esoteric paradigm. We start with where we are. And so the idea is that through the geocentric model, we can clearly see the planes. We can see that the orbit of Mercury, of Venus, of Mars, Jupiter, those are all different actual layers of the heavens until we get to the firmament and the zodiac, right? Which is sort of the ending of our known spiritual, not necessarily physical. There's a physical component to it. That's sort of the ending of our known cosmos. And these planes are kind of being created as we evolve. So we actually can't understand our death process, because as we pass, we actually move through every single planetary sphere, and then we come back down to the earth and reincarnate. So also through the heliocentric model, or with the sun at the center of our the earth revolving around the sun, it confuses the death process in our mind, in our subconscious mind, because we begin again on the earth and the soul goes up through the planetary spheres like this, and then it goes back down. So if you're having the sun as your central point, there's no way for you to really work with that reality. And so even though the earth is spinning around a sun, or the sun is a central body, there's also another sun that our sun is centralized around, so it's sort of like there are issues when it comes to understanding the astral plane and the higher planes when you try to place the sun as the center and not the earth. Okay, this is a member question. I am a digital illustrator and make most of my art using a drawing tablet. Since electricity and technology are Ahriman's domain, does that affect the art in any way? I put a lot of love and soul into it. To me, it doesn't feel that way, but I'm curious what your take is. A bit of an odd question, but could physical art be more holy in a way, or am I concerned over nothing? No, I think that we do have to evaluate our relationship with technology. I think that that's a very good thing to do. But I don't think that we should fear it. I write my lectures on my laptop. I present them from my laptop. I've got lights in here. I'm streaming on technology right now. It's allowing me to connect with all of you. I'm very grateful for that. It's incredible. Think of the positivity that comes, in my life, that comes from this technology, that comes from even electricity, right? I think where we have to be careful is when we become addicted to technology. When we feel like you can't go to the bathroom without your phone. You feel like you can't go to dinner without staring at your phone every 5 minutes. You feel like you can no longer function in the world without your phone or without your computer. Okay, so when it starts to get that addictive quality where you don't feel complete without your device, that's starting to get into more of the Ahrimanic codependency with technology. The idea is that we use technology and we fully understand what it is, the forces that can come through it. We fully understand what it is, and we use it accordingly. But we notice whether or not we're addicted to it or not. You do not want to be addicted to your technology, because that is showing that it's filling some kind of void within you. And then it only gets worse and worse and worse. So if you have to be on the computer all the time, this is showing that there's some healing that needs to be done. So it's really the addiction to it. It's not that we use it. We don't need to become Luddites, right? But I do think that if you're ever wondering, do I have an unhealthy relationship with technology? Go on a technology fast. right? You know, if you're ever wondering, like, do I have an unhealthy relationship with sugar or with food? You know, am I eating my emotions? You know, go on a fast. Try fasting. And you'll see in your fast, when you're not eating that food, when you're not eating, maybe if you're just truly fasting, not having any food, you'll begin to see your relationship with food. You'll begin to see any impulses that are not true hunger, but a different kind of hunger. A hunger for love, a hunger for acceptance. That can manifest as hunger, as physical hunger. The hunger for all of these things can also represent a hunger for technology. We could be clinging to technology because we have different hungers that are not being satisfied, that we need to heal. So one way to always tell whether you have an unhealthy relationship with something, even a person, is to fast. Take a break. Get away from that influence for a while. Honestly. And evaluate what comes up when the urge comes up to, you know, go on the computer. You know, what is really there? What is it trying to distract from? This is how we interact with technology in a healthy way, is we fast from it. You take a break, you go to nature, you leave your computer and your phone somewhere where you're not there for a few days, if you possibly can. You have to arrange your life so that you can do this. That's the only way you're going to know whether or not you have a healthy relationship with technology. Okay. This one is a member question. Okay. Hi, Gigi. I'm hearing a lot about the Book of Enoch and wondering what you think about its origin theory for early humans. Yeah, so I would say, I would say this is kind of going back into the alien stuff, which I already mentioned. I think that when we go back into any holy text, whether it be the Bible, whether it be the Bhagavad Gita, the Puranas in Eastern traditions, and we start getting into these origin myths, right? What we want, and even also the Sumerian myths, right? Our mind wants to read these things, read these ancient books or these older spiritual texts in a literalist way, because that's how we operate today. And so we're going back to the Book of Enoch, we're going back to the Bhagavad Gita, we're going back to the creation myths of the Sumerians, the Babylonian creation myths. And we're looking at it with today's consciousness. You can't do that. And so all of these reinterpretations of the Book of Enoch and other texts, it's like, I finally understand it. We finally get it. No, you're just looking at a text that was written when human beings were in a different level of consciousness, a clairvoyant spiritual consciousness, and you're reading it with a materialistic perspective. It's not revelating. It's not now that we truly understand it. To truly understand spiritual texts that were written 2,000 years ago or more, you have to enter into the condition of consciousness that human beings were in 2,000 years ago or more, which was a clairvoyant consciousness. As I mentioned, even up to the Greco-Roman era, human beings were able to see and communicate with spiritual beings much easier. We were not yet entrenched in the materialism that we are now. That only began around the 1400s. So when you go before that, especially back into like ancient India, you know, you're looking at a people that were clairvoyant, that were seeing spiritual beings plain as day. You know, the story of what people think are like aliens or extraterrestrials are angels, because we used to see them around us all the time. We knew they were there. It was obvious to us. The spiritual world was once upon a time obvious to us. We didn't objectively understand everything. We now have this more objectivity to understand, but it came at a cost. We lost the sort of subjective knowledge of everything, the natural knowledge of everything. And so there's a real caution, and it becomes a problem when we think we're going to have, again, this materialist consciousness that is a literalist consciousness, and that we're going to go back and finally understand the creation of humanity. Because most people that do this, it leads to the alien God ideology. Like in most of Eric von Daniken's talks, everything becomes a technology, and space, he wants to change, the higher planes into space. Okay, that's literally materializing the spiritual. And angels into extraterrestrials, why? They're angels. So it is this sick impulse to hypermaterialize and completely rewrite spiritual reality in a weird caricature of what it truly is, that is meaningless and really dangerous. Because if your mind tries to work with a system that's incorrect, you just automatically default into the lower planes because it's not accurate. So this is the problem with because you said you're hearing a lot about the Book of Enoch and human origins and things like that, is because people are trying to rewrite these texts in a materialistic way and say, this is really what it is. When the reality is, when it comes to spiritual understanding, we had that naturally, even 700 years ago. We had a more natural understanding of the spiritual planes, and we saw them all around us. So that's how these books are written. And we cannot enter the true understanding of these books unless we can recreate that consciousness in our being, which means we have to become more spiritual. We have to become more clairvoyant. We have to become more sensitive to the spiritual worlds. That's the only way that those books are ever going to make sense. If we try to go back with our mind, it's going to be a mess of literalist, materialist interpretations that literally mean nothing. And when I say they mean nothing, it means they do nothing for you spiritually. So this is sort of where we are with these weird, weird false movements that want to rewrite spiritual texts into complete false ideas, of technology and aliens. Okay. But I do talk about, for more information on this, obviously, I talk about the creation of the human being in my Esoteric Secrets of Disclosure series. There's probably a few hours of lectures there. Also, my Venus series also talks about Elohim and things like this, and the angels that the angelic beings that were part of our very early creation. They're not aliens, they're angels. There's a difference in the entire teaching. Okay, how are we doing out there? How are we doing? Okay, I'm gonna do a few more. I'm gonna do 1, 2, I'm gonna do 3 more, okay? All right. Okay, this is from Heg. I'm curious about the animals being cast out of us and it coordinating with animals being on Earth. Is that how animals came into existence? If they were cast out, are they a different version of us? Were minerals cast out of us too? Thank you for helping me understand. This is a great question. And so this is sort of the mystery school teaching about human and earthly creation, is that the human being actually stands as the embodiment of the earth and all of the lower kingdoms. And so when the earth was in an astral condition, that's key to understanding. When the earth was in an astral and etheric condition, it was receiving the patterns and archetypes of the cosmos, if you will, of the sun, and really a prior system of development that our Earth was evolving, if you will. So there's a period of involution when the Earth is developing in its astral and etheric condition, where it's receiving all these patterns for life. And the human being is basically absorbing all of that, right? And the human being stands as the physical, eventually physical being, but the actual entity that contains all, right? It is the literal embodiment of the Earth. This is another reason why a lot of the alien stuff doesn't really make sense, is because human beings are the angel of the Earth. There's no beings, you know, that are would be from another planet physically that would be better than us. It's like impossible. There are superhuman beings in the angelic hierarchies, obviously, but they're connected to the Earth. So basically, the human being stands as the complete archetype of the Earth and the sun for the earthly plane, right? As the Earth develops in its astral form and its etheric form, it's effectively casting out what would be lesser kingdoms of life from its being, from the human template, if you will. Okay, so these are sort of like the forms that could not hold the pressure of being human and kind of were cast out, and they become the lower kingdoms of life. Lower, definitely not as in lesser, but lower as in they're not human, right? Technically, in a way, humans are lower than angels, right? That doesn't mean we're less than, but it means that that's a superhuman kingdom. So essentially, the animals appear on the Earth after being cast out from the human form, and this is described in anthroposophy. It's described in the theosophy, early Eastern teachings, where the key is to remember that it's non-physical. We only physicalized in Lemuria. So remember that there's literally several incarnations of the Earth that we live on that are astral and etheric, where this is going on, where the forms are separating off from the human template. But the human template is the embodiment of the Earth, and it's the embodiment of the sun. So it is the embodiment of all that is below it. And so I hope that answers your question. Yeah, so everything of the lower, it's my understanding that everything, the mineral kingdom was cast out, I believe, around Saturn and in the earliest, right? And then it goes plants, cast out animals, and then we become fully human. And the human form is sort of like the culmination of all. This is also why when you get into the really wild esoteric teachings about human and planetary development, you start getting into this wild aspect where it's like, if you go past Vulcan development, you can become a planetary regent, and you can basically become like a star, and like it just goes on, because the human being is complete. There's no way that a human being could become a star or a solar entity unless it had everything within it. So I hope that makes sense. I know that that part of the Lemurian lecture is harder to, I know it's a little harder to understand, but I hope that makes sense. Because it's funny with Darwinism. With Darwinism, it's like you start out in the animal kingdom and you rise up from it, but that's completely opposite to reality, to esoteric reality. And that's also why the alien God ideology is sort of like a correction for Darwinism, right? Because in the alien God ideology, you don't have to explain why apes become humans through adaptation. You know, you basically can insert this idea that aliens created humans through apes. So it's a way of keeping that Darwinism alive by just adding aliens. And that will keep people from understanding their true origins. Now, it doesn't mean that the humans were not tampered with by fallen angels. That's definitely not what I'm saying. And I've been a broken record on that. What I'm saying is that that's not the mechanism in which we evolve. We do not evolve through genetic modification. We evolve through the sun and through spiritual forces that materialize over time into higher and higher bodies. And the last arc of our evolution, our ascension, is done through our own ability to spiritualize ourself. So it's not through transhumanism. It's not through genetic modification. It is literally through our own ability to spiritualize ourself. So we cannot allow that reality to be taken from us by these lies. Okay. And I don't even know if the people that propagate them mean to. Probably, maybe some do, some don't, but we've got to understand the real story of creation, because in a couple years, we're going to get a real false version of it, and it's not going to be good, and we have to be ready for that. All right. Okay, 2 more. I love doing this, though. I do have to say, on my live platform, I go for a lot longer. We're just going to do a little shorter session here today, but I am having a blast being with you. Your questions are chef's kiss. They're so good. Let's do 2 more. Okay. How do you know if your intuition is from your higher self, from your material self, or from negative spirits attempting to lead you astray? How does one differentiate? Ooh, it's hard. So it's experience. Discernment is key. So the whole session that we did as a group on my private platform last week was actually all about this. And there was a lot of stories about, people feeling like they had followed the wrong teacher and had been exposed to like information they felt like wasn't correct. There were stories of people who had done meditations that were given to them by people that they believed were dishonest and parasitic, like darker practitioners. And the whole conversation last week was a lot of it was about, being exposed to these darker forces, and can you clear yourself of that, or how much effect does that have on you if you end up going down the wrong path? And ultimately, we ended up centering around the reality that, listen, believing the wrong thing is part of being human. The best teacher that you will find will have certain aspects of the spiritual world that is obscured to them, of course. So we're always working in the mystery, right? Mystery with a capital M. We're always working in the mystery. And when we're in the mystery, there's always these blind spots. And these blind spots are always directly associated with what we don't know about ourselves. And this is why the great Greek mystery schools had above the door, know thyself. Because when you know yourself, you're going to know the astral plane. You're going to know everything that confronts you in the mirror world. So the more that you know your joys, the more that you know your pain, the more that you even objectively understand the spiritual worlds too, your body, everything, the more aware you are, the more protected you are, right? And this is also why traditionally in the mysteries, this isn't necessarily the case anymore, obviously, but you usually weren't really allowed to teach until you were 40. There was sort of like traditionally, if you were in a very regimented temple culture, you wouldn't even be able to take a leadership position and teach until you were 40. Because it's not until you're 40 years old that you go through all of your transits and all of your different phases of development to really know thyself. So we don't live in that world anymore. And maybe it's not as valid. Maybe it's more so. I guess that's up for debate. But I mention that because your greatest protection against lower astral forces and dark people in your life is self-knowledge. Okay, and self-knowledge comes from making the effort to heal your trauma, to ask yourself tough questions, and to allow Christ to enter your heart and to illuminate your light and shadow for you to see. And allowing Christ into your heart so that you can actually have the strength and the connection to face you knowing yourself. Very, very, very important. So part of your spiritual development journey is going to actually be interacting with people and beings that you would consider negative. Okay? Real talk. Just being real with you. If you are learning to communicate with spirit, right? It's completely naive and bizarre to think that you're just going to open up your heart to spiritual forces and you're only going to get good things all the time. It's also completely naive to think that human beings are not vehicles for both dark and light. This is nonsense. We are vehicles for both. And through self-development, we learn how to channel them properly and become aware of them. So you will encounter dark spirits. You will encounter dark entities. It's just like, when you're on the bus and there's like a weirdo, there's like a, strange person that has a dark energy that's like staring at you or something. It's like, yeah, that's basically in the spiritual realm too. You will encounter things, and it's not something to panic about. It's something that you learn to navigate, and how you learn to navigate them is by being fooled. How you learn to navigate and discern whether an entity is a good entity or a bad entity is literally to experience it and then to be fooled for a period of time and then know the difference. Right? That's how we learn. It's a visceral experience. And so this is why I always say I'm most impressed by teachers and individuals who have been through cults, who have been through these dark periods of spiritual abuse, and they still turn towards Christ. They still turn towards the light. People who have been tricked that still come back to spirit are the most impressive people to me. And they are the individuals that I think will be the best at discerning dark from light because they've been through it. They've been tricked before. And they had the power to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to stick with it and to learn and to go inward. And that gives you a special power. So the real power of discernment comes from having lived it, from being introduced to these forces at some point in your life, or having them around you, or reading material that is poorly channeled, right? Poorly, having a teacher that is not a good teacher, that channels dark things, and you get wound up in that kind of stuff. So by being in the New Age, right? The dark part of the New Age, for years or whatever it is, that actually is how you learn to discern, is by literally being in it and then coming out of it. And then once you come out of it and you start truly finding yourself, finding your true I, your true identity, truly studying and learning the objective science of spirit. It is an objective thing we can study, just like the natural world. It's just you have to develop the abilities to see and eventually sense it a bit more. But it is a science that can be ascertained. Once you begin to have that, you become a very powerful person because you've been through it. And so I know that there's this perfectionism that we all have, where we just we feel like, oh, if you ever get caught up in a cult, or you ever get caught up in channeling a negative entity or something like that for years, it makes you a bad person. No, if you can turn that around, that can actually make you a very powerful person because you know exactly what not to do and what to look for. Someone who's never been exposed to that has to learn that, right? And so we have to let go of this perfectionism where it's like, you have to act like you've never encountered it or whatever. It's like, it's not about being perfect, it's about being honest. And it's about understanding that when it comes to detecting spiritual forces and their nature, especially dark ones, you have to have actually encountered them and overcome them and come to the other side, right? That's how we learn discernment. And so the more educated you are, the better. And the more loving you are, the better. There's certain things that we can do to bolster ourselves that give us a kind of purity to experience the spiritual planes that's absolutely necessary. But if we have blind spots and we end up encountering a darker entity because of our blind spot, our job is not to panic. Our job is to battle with that and to learn about that and to use that darkness to learn about ourselves and come on the other side of that 10 times more powerful. We're meant to face darkness, to transform it, not avoid it. And that's what gives us the power of discernment. So in other words, how it looks in the actual process for you is this is for everyone. You know, there's going to be some spiritual forces that you can sense that you're going to immediately be put off by. Come around, you may sense them. It's going to be certain teachers that teach in a certain way. You're like, this doesn't resonate with me. Certain forces you're going to be able to recognize, say no, and you're going to be able to reject it. Because that force is something that you've overcome within yourself. So you can see it in the world. You've had the battle, you've won, you've integrated it. It's obvious to you. You're not going to go down that road. And that's why you'll see some people, especially in modern times, like you see some people getting caught up in these movements and these ideologies. And you're like, where is this coming from? They seem like they're so intelligent. What is going on? And it's because they haven't battled and won with the dark aspect of them that is represented in that external thing. So they're attracted to it because they don't understand it, because they haven't discovered what that is as an inner potentiality within themselves. So you can have completely intelligent people that are traditionally intellectual be doing some crazy things when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to movements, because within them and the deeper currents of their being, there are shadows that are not faced, that they're controlled by. And they seek that out as an external impression and become part of these movements, even though they seem too smart. It's because they haven't yet illuminated that lower part. Does that make sense? So what we don't understand about ourselves, we will end up experiencing in the spirit world and the physical world until we can master it. When we master it, it becomes obvious to us in the spiritual world and in the physical world. So the only thing that really protects you is self-awareness. And to become truly self-aware, it is an everyday practice of being with yourself and of listening with yourself and not trying to hide your emotions with food, with addictions, with anything. You have to be not to the point that it's like it's weird and you overwhelm yourself, but you have to be dedicated to truly being with yourself and with what arises. And that is how you navigate difficult situations. And also, you know what? If you do have a difficult period, if you do feel like you got caught up in something, don't be really hard on yourself, because again, that's part of how we evolve. Okay, this is the last question, and then we're going to do super chat thank yous and shout outs. Okay, Allie, is the reason this 2030 agenda is being rushed because of these crypto-terrestrials or devolved human beings need the forms, need for them to incarnate back into before they die, since they cannot naturally incarnate back into the Earth system. Now you've got it. Now you've got it. So the big picture is that there's a line of basically fallen human beings that we would really also associate with fallen angels, or, which are basically demonic entities that live parallel on the earth with human beings, but they can't live on the surface. They sort of live underground, right? Think of underground bases and stuff like this. But they're actually from earlier periods of development, and they're barely hanging on. And they require basically transhumanism to exist. They require all kinds of technologies basically to still exist. Okay, it's someone that this gets into a lot of what people want to call aliens, but it's really not aliens. It's really the story of our Earth. It's the story of our prehistory, of our earthly prehistory. It's not the story of other planets, really. It's really the story of the Earth and of beings that are inside the life wave, which are evolving properly with the planet, and beings that have fallen technically outside of the life wave into the subhuman spheres that want to get back into the life wave. And they provide that antagonistic antichrist force because they're always trying to modify the human form in order to reduce it so that they can enter into it and get out of the subhuman planes, because the subhuman planes, the lower astral plane, is always trying to destroy them and put them in a process of decay, all right, which is a constant threat of inversion and decay. So they're always trying to find a form. And the more Christed our form becomes, the more spiritualized our form becomes, and every day our form is becoming a little less material, and the earth is becoming a little less material, right? That is a threat to them because they can't actually get into this higher octave. They're actually super material, really. So they have to modify. That's why all this stuff is being pushed now. That's why CRISPR is being pushed now. Neuralink and transhumanism stuff is being pushed now, is because we're actually beginning to rise out of matter. The earth is beginning to spiritualize into a etheric form every day, more and more and more. It's etherizing. Our body is etherizing. It's becoming less material every day, every breath. This is called the ascension in the New Age. It's happening every day, little by little. The subhuman forces that are really hyper material to the point that it's like a weird material decay energy, they can't have that because they don't have anything to feed on. So their whole agenda, the whole real satanic, demonic, antichrist agenda, whatever language you want to use, is literally to stop the earth from ascending, from taking a spiritual form, and to stop the human being from spiritualizing. In order for that to happen, the earth has to be surrounded by these discordant frequencies, like radiation and electricity. The earth has to become electrified, which is the lecture I did on the electric apocalypse, right? Certain things have to happen in order to prevent the earth, what they think will prevent the earth from dematerializing. The body also has to be prevented from actually achieving resurrection by putting microchips in there, by putting heavy metals in there. They don't want by introducing genetic modification. This is all about preventing human beings from developing a glorified etheric body, which is also called the resurrection body, which is the mystery of resurrection in Christian esoterica. So we're looking at very sinister forces that are trying to prevent the spiritualization of the human being and the spiritualization of the earth, especially by 2030. Now, 2030 is a very specific date, and I was actually planning on doing some lectures. Well, I have a lecture planned about 2030, and actually very sinister. So basically, we'll just talk about it now. Why not? So actually, the being Sorath or Sorath, which is in a sense, it's a black sun being. He is an inversion of the solar logos. He's the inversion of God, a true anti-force, a true source of inversion, and really what we would consider evil. He appears in the etheric plane. He appears around the earth around the year 2030. And I have the information that I'm going to use to support that, but it actually is from some Steiner lectures that I discovered while working on the War of All Against All series and Electric Apocalypse. And so there's actually a pattern of Antichrist that is playing out. And if you are possessed by the Antichrist impulse, which is a demonic impulse, you're hooked into that agenda. And now some people are intergenerationally bonded with demonic entities. They're raised in families where they get introduced to it, and their whole world is basically the Antichrist paradigm that they think is holy. Now, usually this Antichrist paradigm is they think that they're God. So they don't believe in Christ. They don't believe in any God above them. They believe that they're basically, it boils down to them basically thinking they're God. They're responsible for evolution. Might is right. It's a very degenerate system of belief that just leads to basically domination and might is right behavior. But that is what they believe. And so when you are possessed by these darker forces, that is your reality. You don't view the world the way that people who are genuinely spiritually awakened see the world. They have a completely different perspective. They are not seeing the world in the same way. We live side by side with these people, but they do not see the world in the same way. It's very important to understand that they do not operate in the same way. So they are trying to carry out an agenda that on the lowest level has to do with obviously consolidating people into mega cities, right? To live the most unnatural life you can imagine. You know, go over there in the corner and eat your bugs in your pod in this highly surveilled neighborhood. And you're, you know, basically if you make one naughty meme on social media, you're going to go to, like, you know, jail. This is the goal. So that's the most mundane level. But don't forget that the people who have created Agenda 2030, all right, these are people who also have really intense occult beliefs, really intense spiritual beliefs. And part of that is also the incarnation of Antichrist, the creation of the new Adam, and basically changing the planet into this electrical mass, this mass of Wi-Fi, more Wi-Fi signals and just discordant frequencies than anyone even needs. It's not about not having the internet or not using electricity. It's literally about overwhelming the earth with it, to the point where it's so over the top. It's like, you know, do we really need like 9G all over the world? It's not that we can't use it. It's too much. That's part of it as well. And so there's a whole spiritual aspect, demonic aspect to the 2030 agenda that is their religion ultimately. And part of it does have to do with the line of the fallen angels on the planet, which are not these glory-filled beings. but that are actually degenerate humans because they fell and they don't have the spiritual forces to even have a glorified body. The real higher beings that are truly angelic, they didn't fall. So these are the beautiful forms that the human being is mirrored after, not fallen angels. These are beings that look grotesque. You know, sometimes there's this idea in our ancient past that the fallen angels are like these beautiful beings. No, at this point in time, they look like grays. They look like fallen, degenerate things at this point. And they're trying to have these genetic forms that they can enter into so that they can walk the earth. But it has to do with a line from Atlantis that connects with Mars, that is fallen, that has that DNA in it. And it's not angelic DNA, okay? It's fallen angels. So when an angelic being falls and is cast into the abyss, right? Or when they walk the earth for a period, their genetic sequence, their whole thing is not being updated by receiving the sun. It's a degenerate thing, right? When you look at the human being that's evolving with the planet, that's an angelic thing. So this whole idea that like fallen angel genetics are better, that's a lie. Those genetics are not the same. They're not, they're paused at a certain point, and they have not experienced the upgrades since then, because you need to be a human being of the earth to receive those. Right. So a lot of the angel stuff, the stuff about human creation that involves beings from the angelic hierarchy, that exists in Lemuria and kind of part of Atlantis. That environment doesn't exist anymore. And so you're looking at a strain of fallen beings that are trying to keep going by trying to enter the life wave in various different ways. So 2030 is a major agenda point because the earth is dematerializing. Okay, humanity is dematerializing slowly. They can't have that because, again, they don't have the impulse to transform themselves because they're parasitic, they're inverted. So at the end of all of this, it's literally, on the spiritual plane, it's literally about creating vehicles for these entities to exist in through making the form more and more synthetic, through genetic modification and through transhumanism, and also through genetically modifying the earth in every possible way and electrifying the earth. That and don't forget that the body will become more electrified with these technologies too. So again, it's not about not having technology, but it's about understanding how all of these things can be used for very dark purposes if we don't understand balance. Okay, so we're going to end it here. These were really great questions. We did a lot of stuff on death. We did a lot of stuff on psychic development, and we went down the alien road today. So that's good. That's fun. So let's do super chats. And thank you everyone who contributed. We have Dario Darkangelo, Craig Dowling, ambient guitar music, YouTube user 427, Benjamin Brewer, and Catherine Massetti. Thank you guys so much. That really helps us out over here. Thank you everyone for joining us today. A big shout out to Leighton, who's out there moderating. A big shout out to Wolf. We couldn't do it without you. And I will be doing this exact same thing a week from today on gigiyoung.com. If you want to participate in another question and answer session, I will be there. We go for longer. It's a real marathon. And I go deeper into a lot of things that I just can't say on YouTube. which happened with a question earlier today. There's just some topics that I don't want to get into on YouTube. So that information is also on gigiyoung.com, those kinds of questions. I also have a lecture coming up that I was going to do today, but then I thought we should probably do a live Q&A so I can feel into any questions you have. And then I will be doing another lecture right here on YouTube and Facebook and Rumble next. So do look out for that. Sign up for my newsletter so you can be notified when I am live, and with anything else that I've got going on. So as always, you guys, all my love your way. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you in our next stream.